So I was annoying ChatGPT.
One of my favorite statements or lines that she said in there was to run from the storm, to dance in the rain.
The female Alex was told her salary was going to start £1,000 lower than the male Alex.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to 2 + 2 = 5. It's a place where we try to make sense of what's going on in life and what's happening in the business world and our own world. Today, we have our co-host with me, Lauren, as always, going to be joining us in the conversation. And we have a special guest today in Jude Copeland. Jude, I hope I haven't butchered your surname there. But
no, that's fine.
Quick intro on yourself so people know who we're speaking to.
So I'm a legal technology lawyer and I specialise in e-discovery, AI. I've been using AI for quite a number of years, probably almost 8 or 9 years. And I promise I will keep the boring law chat to a minimum.
Don't worry, we're going to dig into some of that law chat. But I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, you just mentioned being on it for a number of years. I guess ChatGPT is really brought AI to the forefront, and every person in retail, as I like to call it now, knows about AI. When did you get into it?
So part of my job is document review, and it's commonly called document review, but actually it is the foundation of a lot of litigation, investigations, and regulatory responses. And very, very early on, a number of leading review platforms realized that there was a very clear business case for the use of AI. And it's very, very subtle, and lots of people don't really think of it as AI, but it really helped reduce the amount of human work that needed done, and it also actually increased quality. So AI was used to identify things that humans don't need to look at. Yeah. And in practice, that means, if I email you and Lauren and say, "Oh, can I go for lunch? Do you want me to pick you up anything?" If that is subsequently part of an investigation, that email, this is a really, really very basic example, but that email exists in my outbox as a sent item, but it also, exactly the same email is in your 2 inboxes. Yeah. And there's no real need for anybody to look at 3 copies of exactly the same document. Yeah. And what AI and predictive coding did was deduplicate those documents. So instead of looking at 3 documents, it actually only put 1 forward for a human to review. And then that really has reduced the number of documents that we have to look at, and it makes our life a little bit easier. And that has been going for quite a long time.
What would have been some of the challenges in the early days of that? Because you made a good example there of you picked up a box item and you've got 2 inbox items. Did you see some challenges with that when you were trying to implement it, in the early days?
No, not really, because actually it was very, very helpful in identifying really what we had to look at. Probably it made some lawyers feel a little bit nervous, because that meant that we were doing less work because we weren't looking at 3 of the same documents. We weren't billing for looking at 3 of the same documents. But actually, very quickly that it's kind of a rising tide of data. So, the matters that we would work on and that I've worked on are just astronomical. And actually, if we were to look at all of the documents old school way, print them out and look at them, it just would be prohibitive. I mean, I've worked on cases which have considered a document pull of 2 million, 3 million, 5 million, and actually there was one case I vaguely worked on, and it had almost 40 million documents on it. So that would just take an absolute lifetime for a lot of document reviewers and a lot of lawyers, and clients don't really like that. You know, if you think about how many emails you have in your inbox, and if you think about like how many messages you send across all of your social media platforms, and I mean, I'm a really bad data person because my phone usage is about 9 hours a day, as well as working full time. So, you know, all of that data has to go somewhere. And, you know, if you're doing an investigation or if you're doing a piece of litigation, you're coming at some of these things, you know, years and possibly decades after. So you have to find a way where you can pinpoint the key pieces of information. And, you know, it's very, very easy for us to sort of think, oh, you know, it's really, really straightforward and we just use search terms. But actually, there's lots of use cases for AI around, like we call it early case analysis. And that's kind of where probably, I don't know how many of your team will understand this, but just having a hook around the documents, that's like a real Belfast term. Just going for like a little bit of a swim in the documents and actually finding some interesting things or some unusual things. And, you know, that's really, really rich and valuable information. And it helps to get that very early doors. What you don't want to be doing as a lawyer is, you know, thinking that a case is a certain way and then 2-3 months into a document review, or, you know, even at worst case during a trial, realizing that there's something that was in your documents that you didn't expect. So that's like a real, like, that's why we use AI, and that's why we sort of think about building a process that actually optimizes all of the technology. It's very, very dull. Hopefully I haven't put everybody off AI.
No, I was going to ask you a bit more around that sort of topic. With when I look at your career, you know, you're in law, you're really interested in AI. Clearly you're you know, playing your part in AI adoption in your industry and maybe in other industries. You haven't really followed the norm path, right? Otherwise you would never have started to experiment with AI. So I should have asked this at the start of the interview. What does 2 + 2 = 5 mean to you?
Well, you're definitely right about the career. I qualified as a solicitor 12 years ago, and there were actually 2 people in my tutorial group. And there was a real fear that our exam results were going to be emailed out to our masters, or if we had persistent latenesses or absences. I was a very good student, so I didn't have to worry about most of that. But 2 of those people, their masters didn't have email. They just didn't use email.
So you got lucky.
Did not use email. So, but yeah, well, unfortunately, my master had a number of emails, unfortunately, and everybody knows them, so I couldn't get away with anything. But yeah, it's really interesting, sort of how you think about technology. So that's changed over my career of, you know, over a decade. So we've gone from no emails. I remember working in one firm where, this was just before I qualified, where they liked us to type the mortgage deeds onto the mortgage deed using a typewriter. And I had 3 of my colleagues explaining how to use a typewriter to me. But my 2 + 2 = 5 is actually a slide on one of the training courses that I provide to. Actually, I use it in Ulster, and I use it at the Institute of Professional Legal Studies, training solicitors, and I use it in my own firm. But I think 2 + 2 = 5 is a really good way to explain AI. So it really helps people understand that AI isn't a search engine. It actually goes on context. It doesn't go on kind of what's out there and what's most popular. And 2 + 2, as solicitors, we do accounts. I also really do not like maths, but even I know that 2 + 2 = 4. But the early versions of AI sometimes got that wrong. And that's obviously because AI is a large language model, and it's probabilistic, and actually it looks at the preponderance of what is out there. So whenever people say 2 + 2 equals, that we know that 2 + 2 = 4. But if you think about all of the data that's out there, 2 + 2, whenever those appear in blogs or in online resources or in books, it is 2 + 2 = 5, which is the quotation from George Orwell's 1984. And I explain that to people in a way that actually both answers are correct, because you're getting the factually correct one, 2 + 2 = 4, but you're also getting the most popular and the most contextually accurate one, which is 2 + 2 = 5. And you can use both of them, not interchangeably, but both are right and wrong, depending on the scenario.
Talking about right and wrong, so many companies want to go out there and use AI. I don't know if it's because it's a buzzword still for them, or whether they are really after automation, or are they after efficiency. What should they, what are some of the reasons that they should be looking to use AI?
So there's a really very strong business case for using AI, and a lot of it comes from the efficiencies that it can deliver, the competitive edge that it gives on other people in your market. But a lot of it is actually driven kind of by the customer as well. I think increasingly there is the expectation, it sort of varies between markets, but there is the expectation that AI is used and you use all of the tools open to you to make it more efficient. And AI is one of those tools. I was sort of reflecting on a couple of things that I saw earlier today online on LinkedIn. And, it is a bit of a culture change. And I think AI is an all-pervasive part of your culture. And the adoption of AI will really succeed or fail depending on risk and your culture around risk and your culture around innovation. Because if you don't have any type of risk monitoring, it's going to be disastrous. If you have too much risk, you're going to miss out on all of the benefits of it. So really it's about, I think, being a bit cynical and, putting it through its paces, because I do think, this frees up a lot of individual people's time to do the work that is most rewarding to them, but is also most rewarding to the business. So there is no real point in me doing things that I can very easily use AI for. But it is about culture. And I think about this a lot, that, 10, 15, 20 years ago, if we were going out for dinner, you would maybe ring a restaurant and you would have to wait until the restaurant was open.
I open the yellow pages first.
Oh, yes. And do you know what? I don't even know if they exist anymore. I really want to see one.
They definitely exist, as do directories.
Yeah.
But yes. So you would have done that. You would have to restaurants, and then you would have phoned and all of that stuff. And I don't know about you, but I think this is probably an insight into me. But I'm really bad at being organized. So I love a good app where I can actually wake up at 2 a.m, realize I haven't booked a restaurant, and do it online at 2 o'clock in the morning. And that is a cultural thing. We're still eating in restaurants, but actually the interface is much, much nicer. And, not to go into law too much, but a really core thing about legal practice is that we have to do kind of compliance checks, know your client and understand where their funds are, and if they're politically exposed, and if there are any sort of risks. But in our firm, it's a very, very small thing, but it is also about philosophy. We would have required clients to bring in a proof of identification and then a proof of address. And then we would have had to have photocopied those, and then they would have had to, run in during their lunchtime or find, and actually it ended up delaying various aspects of it. And it also took up maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes of time per client. And we now have automated that, and we use AI. We use an app that we've brought in, and people can sort of log on any time of day or night and do a biometric face check, scan a copy of their ID, and that's all done at a more convenient time for them.
Do you know what would take that to the next level? If they then had that on a zero knowledge blockchain.
Yes.
That they can have ultimate control of what they want you to see, how long they want you to see it, and when they want you to see it. So,
well, it's quite that's a really interesting point, because actually, because we have ongoing duties as lawyers, we have to monitor what happens throughout that transaction, and some of the better apps are very, very good. They're much better than the traditional process of photocopying and, inputting it into our own system, our own sort of client system. But a number of them will do, constant monitoring. So if something flags up, that comes through to us. So actually, from a risk perspective, it has lowered our risk and increased our compliance. And it's much nicer for customers. Like most of them actually do it out of hours. They're sitting watching TV and they're like, oh, I have to go and do this link. And, that's the reality of, all of us working and leading full lives.
So I've got a question for you. You mentioned something about making it easier, and the search it's more than just a search engine. I want to ask you about one of the pitfalls that I sort of think about all the time is, for the last 20 years, we've had the internet, we've had the web. I want to go to a restaurant. I'll now go onto the internet and I'll have a look in the local region. I'll look at all the different restaurants, and I will then make up my mind. Yeah, I want to eat this type of food today, and I fancy going to this restaurant, and I will go. Is AI going to eliminate that element of choice? Because now I'm going to go into a search, not a search engine, but into AI and say, I want to be in Reading. I feel like eating chicken, and I want to, potentially go, do this, and this. And it's going to do that and give me maybe one option or two options of that. So, and I'm not seeing what else is available. So is that taking any of that away, or how do you feel about that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I think about that particular thing a lot, because actually in a legal context, if you have a specific legal problem,
you want to see lots of different cases, right? To see what's happened rather than just one or two that's been picked out for you.
And, but you're an individual. If you have a legal problem with, say, an annoying neighbor, you can sit at home with Claude or Gemini or AI, like a Copilot or ChatGPT, and you can put in all of, you can ask it questions. But I think it also kind of comes down to prompting as well, and people don't really see the value of lawyers a lot of the time, because they're like, oh, yeah, that information's out there. It has access to all of the same laws. But what an AI doesn't do is it doesn't think about your very specific circumstances, and it doesn't think about what is best for you and what is your strategy. And like the restaurant's a perfect example. If it was me picking a restaurant, I do kind of, well, Belfast is very tiny, so I know pretty much every lovely restaurant, but I'm vegetarian, so would I prompt, oh, one of the people is vegetarian, but then I also hate mushrooms and I hate coriander. I mean, I cannot stand coriander.
Well, don't eat any Indian food, then we put it in everything.
Do you know what? Weirdly, Indian food can make it work. It's just the rest of the food. It's just like evil parsley. But, I think, in those contexts, you're actually not a two-dimensional character. You're not a sort of... I don't think you can reduce that experience to a prompt. So very often people will sort of come to me and say, "Oh, I ran this issue through ChatGPT and I got this response." And I'm going, "Okay, so for a start, you clearly didn't put in that you're based in Northern Ireland, which has a different legal system in some respects. You didn't really put in what is the most important things for you to get out of this emotionally. You didn't put in what finances are open to you, but you've just come up with this strategy, which actually would cost a huge amount of money to deploy. Here's an alternative strategy that me, with a lot more experience than ChatGPT and a lot more years on the clock, although I'm not reading as many documents as ChatGPT, but that is the sort of the human value that AI, I don't think, can replace at the moment. It can help, but I don't think it's going to replace us anytime soon.
Yeah, we'd love to talk to you in a second about tools and interesting tools that you've seen and used, and if companies where to start, where's the one place where they could start doing some evaluation, etc. But before we go into that, let's talk about pitfalls. Let's prepare some people first. We've spoken about one of the pitfalls about freedom of choice and actually getting full research, and in some cases that's useful. If it's one, like you mentioned, if it's one particular thing you want to research, it's great because it will go out and find that info. But if you want to research a number of things, it then may be a little bit difficult. What are some of the other pitfalls that people should be looking at? There's automation, there is selection, there's analytics, there's all of these sort of things that can be done with AI. So what are, in your opinion, some of the pitfalls?
There are a lot of pitfalls, and I think people using AI need to understand that it is a tool, and you don't use every tool for everything. And you really have to understand the risks. And it's kind of weird because AI is completely new in the sense that the technology is pretty much newly rolled out, but actually a lot of the information that underpins it is old. It has been around for years and years and years. And that, going back to the context piece and the prompting piece, what was I doing? Yes, I was doing some business development research for my practice area, so legal technology and AI. And I'm pretty much the only person that does some aspects of my job in Northern Ireland before Northern Ireland courts. And it's really, really funny because I asked Copilot to do a deep dive into my colleagues. And really, it was just for speed. So with my colleagues in other firms. And, one version of it came up naming people who I know, but it was in the wrong firm and they've never worked in those firms. So it had lots of people say that would be a hallucination. I think actually it was kind of an illustrative description rather than a true hallucination. But it was quite funny because at the very top of it, it ranked me as one of the top tier individuals and said, Jude Copeland is a top tier individual in this area. She is a very respected practitioner. I'm going, and I get that a lot because Jude is more commonly a girl's name. So
apart from you and Jude Law,
no,
the two famous Judes.
I'd love to be him. But another example, actually, because we're in Women's History Month and I do a lot of activism around gender-based violence. I'm really I love International Women's Day. It is such a vibrant celebration of progress and a reminder of the things that have not progressed. So this morning, I kind of like to annoy some AI chatbots. So I was annoying ChatGPT. And I prompted a very, very, I kind of wanted to get the variables right. And I put in some prompts about my friend Alex. So my hypothetical friend Alex is a 3 to 4 years qualified solicitor specialising in commercial law in Belfast. And she is in the process of getting a new job and wants to know how much she should be asking for, what the salary range is. And I basically kept the text the same for Alex as he, him, and Alex as a she, her. And it was really interesting because actually the bands were different. Yeah. It was only a little difference. It was only £1,000 difference. But the female Alex was told her salary was going to start £1,000 lower than the male Alex. So a lot of the data is not neutral, and it cannot be thought of as neutral because it really crystallizes a lot of the biases that we have in society. So the gender pay gap, that is the output, and that is the output for years and years and years of data. So, I think bias is really, really key. It has to be checked. There has to be a human element involved in the process and actually sort of questioning it fairly rigorously. I do think that there's a lot of sort of data protection risk. And, people sort of forget whenever you're sitting in the comfort of, your nice cozy office or you're sitting at home, that actually if you're putting in personal data or special category personal data, then I kind of, if it's a sort of public or open source, open source is the wrong term, but if it's like a public service like ChatGPT, I mean, for me, that is the equivalent of getting my personal data and walking up to Belfast City Hall, seeing the first bus that is there and just throwing my personal data onto the bus because I have no idea where it goes. Anybody could have access to it. That's one of the big pitfalls. There are also, people aren't really thinking about the data that they hold. You have data which could be commercially sensitive, which could be price sensitive, could even be subject to non-disclosure agreements. So actually by putting that into using certain forms of AI, that could be exposing you to risk and also your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we're looking at in core team is obviously the EU pay transparency, which is law that's coming into place in June, I think it's this year. Obviously, one of the technologies that we're looking at using is AI. You mentioned a very good point there around, asking she, her, Alex getting less of a pay salary range comparison to Alex, he, him. What other sort of challenges, or how could we overcome those challenges to try and make that data neutral per se, so that there isn't that level of discrimination when it comes to the gender pay gap?
I think it would be a matter of mapping all of your data and mapping where it comes from and what the regulatory requirements are for that. And actually, I think it'll be down to doing a really, this is very boring, but, a sort of workflow or a case manual that applies and, thinking about how you address different data in different jurisdictions and actually how you can aggregate that and, whether or not you need to pseudo-anonymize it and, how you have to process that so that you're actually compliant.
Well, it's music to my ears, you just saying this, because a number of clients we've spoken to over the last couple of weeks, they're finding they're having to go a lot deeper than they thought. So it's no longer male or female in France. It's male or female in a factory in the north of France or in a management office in Paris or in a dev office in this particular region. So there's a hell of a lot of functional work. A lot of people thought, we've got to be live in June 26. It will be easy, but yeah, it's not.
I think you would probably definitely have to visit all of these places, because I think Paris would be really nice right now. That's not my legal advice.
Let's me and you go, Jude. Let's go.
But yeah, I mean, I think, a lot of people sort of don't think about how data can be tracked back and how you can reverse engineer data. So, if you are providing, that if you're working on pay transparency, actually, is there a risk of kind of jigsaw identification for individuals? Because that's a particular issue. You don't want to anonymize it too much that it's completely not usable, but you don't want to have it too detailed that actually, if you get a subject access request, you're producing a huge amount of data for those people.
Yeah. It's always a fascinating conversation to hear you speaking, Jude, because you're always full of information. I think we want to ask a couple of questions outside the legal world of Jude Copeland. And obviously, I've known you for the past, 3 or 4 years now, and I've gotten to see a lot of stuff you do outside, but I'm aware you do tours and you also do a bit of history storytelling. But do you want to just tell us a little bit about some of the stuff you do outside the legal world and maybe sort of promote some of the walking tours you do around Belfast?
Yes, thank you. So outside work, I do lots of different types of activism around LGBTQIA plus rights, and I'm very, very busy over Pride season. But I love our walking tours, because actually it's really kind of you talking about, going deeper into the data and actually analysing it. We have in Belfast this really rich history, but most of it that is shared and is kind of talked about is, our sectarian conflict, which lasted over 30 years. But actually in between all of those sort of binary kind of dramas and really, really sad loss of lives, there is this rich seam of diverse experiences of conflict. So, I really love kind of how other people experience Belfast. I think it's really, really lovely. We have such moments of joy whenever sort of older people talk about bars that are no longer there. But, people actually, whenever they were coming to a bar in Belfast, for example, they were searched by the police and the army. So I have a really vivid memory of my mum's handbag being searched. And, that was what happened in Belfast. And that was my experience of Belfast. And now, we have so many more freedoms, and we have greater acceptance for lots of diverse people. I was chatting to my mum, who grew up kind of 10 miles outside Belfast. And although my parents aren't political in any sense, there were certain things that, we just weren't allowed to do. So whenever I was little, we weren't allowed to buy certain brands. And actually that was because I only found out much later that's because they supported apartheid in South Africa. And my parents actually didn't know any, but there was no racial diversity in Northern Ireland until relatively recently.
Jude, just so you know, you're talking to a guy that was brought up in a village in India where we had nothing but Indians. So diversity was non-existent. I think because we live in the West, diversity means something huge. But when you're brought up in a village in India or something like that, I mean, England's an incredibly, or United Kingdom is an incredibly diverse place.
Yeah, it really is. But it's really sort of amazing to see progress. I had a lovely chat. I work with rainbow refugees, people who've fled other countries where it's not safe for them to be there. It's really interesting because, in my lifetime, it wasn't until the early 1980s that homosexuality was decriminalised in Northern Ireland. And lots of people older than me grew up in an era of criminalisation. And that was a colonial law that was spread to all parts of the world, including India. And it's really, really interesting now that people are coming to Belfast for security. I also find it fascinating that people come to Belfast because it is the world's rainiest place and people are very grumpy sometimes.
We're not that bad, though. We're not that bad.
I don't know.
It depends on what time of the day we catch you.
Yes, before or after coffee, definitely.
Yeah. Caffeine shots are definitely required.
If I wanted to, ask you, what are your top 3 lessons that you've learned in the last 20 years in personal life or at work? For somebody who's finishing university or, in university looking to plan out their career, what would be some of the top 3 lessons that you would teach them?
So I think lots of it is about hard work, unfortunately, and lots of being a lawyer is about being the boring one that can't go out to birthdays or on fun nights out because there's coursework or there are exams or there's a really key piece of client work.
It's a sacrifice.
Yeah, a lot of it is sacrifice. So it's about what you want to sacrifice to what you want to achieve. I think probably because March is Women's History Month, I think I would have a number of female role models that would be really powerful in terms of their careers and, the lessons that I've learned for them. So I became a lawyer whenever I changed all of my A-level choices after I heard a really prestigious lawyer, Helena Kennedy, KC, speaking, and she was talking about the potential of human rights really to change the world. And although I have a practice that's based in AI and legal technology, at the other end of it and within the office, there are people with rights, and I carry those human rights observations with me. I also really love she was a former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Mo Mowlam, and it's really, she's a really, really cool figure. She was ridiculed by the British press for looking like a Geordie trucker. And very quickly she came over here, and one of the tabloids had called her a Geordie trucker, all of the grace of a Geordie trucker, and it became apparent that she was actually bald and was wearing a wig and was experiencing the side effects of cancer treatment. But the important thing beyond that is that she did things entirely differently. She did things in her own way. So there's incredible footage of her coming over to Northern Ireland and going out and meeting people and, being very friendly and very engaged. And that was a completely different way of engaging with the public. And she also, there was a really iconic piece of news. I still remember watching it as a child, where she actually drove in her reinforced police car, drove in at really significant speed into a prison. And she went into a prison to actually talk to killers.
Yeah.
And she talked to them so that she could help deliver peace. And that's what she did. And I love, she has a Desert Island disc, and she's no longer with us, but her Desert Island discs recording is beautiful, because she says, actually, people said that I was very different, and that, I was doing things like, whenever she got annoyed, she would, in meetings with lots of men, she would just take off her wig and throw it on the table. And she's like, I've had enough of this. And that was enough to reset the whole conversation. And she says in that interview that she could only do it as herself. She couldn't do it as any of the men who had come before her. She could only do it as herself. And then probably the last kind of lesson of the three is from one of the other peacemaking women, Professor Monica McWilliams, who also has a Desert Island Discs. I know her, and she does lots of research on domestic abuse, and she's also one of the signatories of the Good Friday Agreement. But she said that once she got in to the negotiating table, there were no other women really around the negotiating table, and she said lots of people would have you believe that this was difficult work and that only one sort of person could do it. She meant men in that context. But she said, actually, once you got in there, you realised that people saying that it was very complicated and you couldn't do it, that wasn't true. You were just as able to do it. So I think it's about having that self-belief and knowing that you can help drive change. If you're really, really passionate about something, that passion can transfer to other people.
Sorry, go on you first, Lauren.
I was going to say, those are three very valuable lessons. So there's a lot to take away from that.
I was going to say, on the second lesson, you were talking about having a female in, somebody that you look up to. And in fact, I didn't realize that that's the way it should be looked at, because I've always had lots of mentors that I talk to on a daily basis that are male and one or two that are female. But actually, one of the biggest inspirations for me over the last 20 years was a presentation was done at Workday Rising about 7-8 years ago, I think, by the then CHRO of Unilever, who was Lena Nair. And the presentation was, on how to thrive in an upside down, inside out world, with so many people getting stressed with all the tech and everything coming out, etc. And I think one of my favorite statements or lines that she said in there was, I want to teach people how to, rather than running from the rain, to dance in the storm. Or to run from the storm to dance in the rain. And it was just, and that was before I started Core Team. And it was one of the actual most inspirational things that I saw, that I thought, I just have to go for it and do what I believe. And if there's change, you got to make a change. So definitely your second point, close to my heart. I think we've had a really interesting conversation there, Jude. I think you could probably come back on a monthly basis and we can talk about lots of different things on a monthly basis. So we might be extending it, an invite out to you more often than not. I think you have knowledge that, and you look at the world from a completely different perspective to me. And that's good to see. It's nice to see, especially you're doing the sort of things that I want to do. I want people to not just use AI, but I want you to think about, okay, are we using it to replace humans, or are we using it to enhance humans? Because again, one of the things that stood out about Lena's presentation is another statement she made, which she said, the future is more human, not less.
Mm-hmm.
And with AI coming out, I think it's really important to be more human in this particular point, to separate yourself. And I give you a simple example of that. The amount of pitches I receive on LinkedIn that you can tell are just written by AI. And you can tell the one or two that are not written by AI, and I immediately respond to them. And I received one the other day where it was the most, the picture is basically, hey, Paul, I do this. I'm married. I've been married for 20 years. I have 3 kids. I do this, I do that. And I've started my business because of this passion. And I was like, yeah, want to talk to that guy.
Yeah.
So I think, it's going to be interesting over the next few years about how that plays out. And I think companies really have to decide, are we looking at efficiency to replace human beings that are doing the work, or are we looking to add value to them so that there's tasks and processes that can be done so they can focus on the more transformational side of the business, I guess.
Yeah, totally. And, I think there's something really fascinating about this era of AI, because, lots of people are really overwhelmed by it. But I'm a very sad person. I love LinkedIn because it's a really, really nice way to keep in touch with people I know and have worked with, but also meet really interesting people and, talk about the things I care about, like legal technology, AI, and gender-based issues. And I love that. But there's just so much sludge. I really cannot stand AI-generated images. I think they completely lack any type of personalization. They tell me nothing about who you are. So I generally don't use AI generated images because actually I think that's a mark of humanity.
And AI is never going to generate this face, mate.
No. But they're just so useless, and I just scroll past them, and all of these kind of AI, and it's like a blue network of cables and switches and lights, and I'm going, yeah, I know what that looks like. That is dull. I kind of want a photo of your dog, or a photo of your cup of tea, or of the shelves that you put up that are now very, very wonky. I want to know those things about you.
I want a picture
of your build a relationship.
Of your trophy husband.
Oh, I love that. I love it.
People have been trying to nick it in the office, but I'm not letting them have it. But Jude, it's been amazing to have you. We've taken more of your time than we thought we were going to. And if you're open to it, we would definitely be inviting you again. And maybe we'll come out to Belfast and do one in person.
I love welcoming people to Belfast. I know all of the best bars, all of the best restaurants. So if you need any recommendations, do send me a wee message.
I think we need to do a 2+2 road tour in Belfast, Paul.
You know what? It's the more I talk to Jude, the more I think that we're going to have to do that, because if you use it in your learning, I'm wondering how many people can learn from this. And the idea of this podcast is to inspire people to follow what they want to. There isn't a norm. I don't know if you read The Alchemist as a book by Paulo Coelho. So it's had that shepherd, had the kid been influenced by society and told him, no, you stick to this, there's no way he would have followed the treasure around the world, even if he found it in exactly the same spot where he left. And that's been my inspiration to say to people, I left university early, and in Indian culture, that's a no-no. So I was a black sheep for well over 15 years in the family of not studying and this, that, or the other. And I'm still happy, I'm in a job that I love, in work that I love. And that's what we want to inspire people to do, to say, if there's something that you're really passionate about, work in that area, develop it, have a look at how you can go out there and find a job and build a career in that area. Because it's when you start doing something that you don't enjoy because society's pushed you into it, that's when you don't love it. That's when you don't like it. So whenever I speak to candidates now, even coming at core team, I was interviewing somebody earlier today for a sales role, and he said, well, what role do you see me in? And I said, look, we're small enough and flexible enough to create things. So why don't you tell me what you enjoy? And that's what we've got to have a look at. And how is AI going to do that in the future? How is, especially with loads of recruitment agencies and HR departments starting to use AI screening, how do you get to know that? How do you get to know how a person smiles, or what they're doing, what their facial reactions are when they're talking to you? You just can't do that.
Yeah, AI can definitely not see the potential in candidates. AI it just lacks the humanity for a lot of these things. It can maybe help, but it can't ever replace the human.
Yeah, if you're free in about 2-3 weeks, we'd love to have you on again, because what I would do for next time is do some research on some companies that are building particular products around screening, and would love to just get, maybe let's analyze some tools. And today, of course, we got so carried away in talking, we didn't get to talk about tools that you like and what you've seen that's there. So yeah, I think there's definitely got to be a part 2 to this.
Yeah, that'd be lovely. Thank you so much.
No problem. I guess with that, I want to say thank you to Jude. Thank you to Lauren again for being a lovely host again. And, we'll be here again next week. So hopefully you'll be here to listen to us, and hopefully you enjoyed this. And if you didn't, we'll still be here next week. So it's all good. But thank you very much.
Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.